Hey everybody, this is Felix Biederman from Chapo Trap House, here with Matt Christman, also from Chapo Trap House. But we're not coming at you today from the world of politics. By the time we record this, the presidential election will already have happened. Either Joseph Biden, Donald Trump, Mitt Romney, Joe Jorgensen, Evan McMullin, Chuck Baldwin, Lyndon LaRoche, any of those people will have won. But for all intents and purposes, that's not why we're here. We're here with you today for this series for cultural enterprise. One of the favorite things of all Americans is the shows. We all love shows. We all love stories. They connect us with our grandparents, with our co-workers. They are sometimes the only thing we can actually talk about with our romantic partners. They are probably the greatest American cultural export since they would make movies where a big rocket ship would crash into the moon's face. But shows are more than just a distraction for us. They are a vivisection of what's going on in America culturally, politically, even psychologically at the time. With this series, Matt and I decided to do that vivisection. The disgusting, painful, waxy kind that you see at German museums where they cut a particularly non-standard penis right down the middle. That's what we're doing for American TV. And we thought, where better to start than kind of at the beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a very interesting show we did today.
Yes, we're starting with one of the longest running dramas of all time, Gunsmoke, also one of the very first television dramas to appear on a network.
Yes, Gunsmoke was not the first TV drama of all time. That distinction can be given to The Queen's Messenger, perhaps, a program shown in 1928 on an experimental General Electric station in Schenectady, New York. Or it can be given to The Man with the Flower in His Mouth, a hilariously titled British entry that was shown in a store window as a display of an exciting new technology in 1930. If someone wanted to be more exacting in their definition, there was The Lone Ranger, a pioneer in serialized television drama that was shown in 1948. It was also not entirely different from radio programs. In fact, it started as one. There were programs like The Shadow, Suspense, and Johnny Dollars. People were familiar with TV. They were familiar with serialized drama. Gunsmoke had even existed as that before its TV debut. But it was different even in that form. Starting in 1952, Gunsmoke was cut from a different cloth on the radio. CBS bosses wanted something that was grimier, erring more towards grim realism than satisfying heroism. In between programs about, say, a cherubic comedian who goes to dinner parties and supernatural detectives who pipe down former flappers, listeners got the adventures of Matt Dillon, Marshal, who wasn't the typical Western hero who had it all figured out, but a scarred, haunted killer who tried his best to enforce a hastily cobbled together moral code while witnessing exemplars of cruelty and greed where there were barely laws to contain either. In 1955, it was brought to television, and some of the bite of the original radio drama had to go. The character of Doc Adams, for instance, became less of a mercenary coroner with a checkered past and more of a gruff medicine man who still had a heart of gold. References to prostitution, outright murder a lot of the times that were hallmarks of the radio drama and character backstories were made far less explicit. And William Conrad, who is the voice of Matt Dillon on radio, was deemed far too fat to play him on the small screen. In the first episode of the first season, on September 10th, 1955, they nonetheless lay out that this is a different type of television program despite all that has changed. The very first shot of the series is not any character or star from the show, but John Wayne himself. And he gives the type of era-specific bullshit folksy pitch that you'd expect from a man who is trying to sell you an absurdly long car, speedballs for housewives, or explaining why socialized medicine is wrong.
Good evening. My name's Wayne. Some of you may have seen me before. I hope so. I've been kicking around Hollywood a long time. I've made a lot of pictures out here, all kinds. And some of them have been westerns. And that's what I'm here to tell you about tonight, a western. A new television show called Gunsmoke. No, I'm not in it. I wish I were, though, because I think it's the best thing of its kind that's come along. I hope you'll agree with me. It's honest, it's adult, it's realistic. When I first heard about the show Gunsmoke, I knew there was only one man to play in it, James Arness. He's a young fella and maybe new to some of you, but I've worked with him and I predict he'll be a big star. So you might as well get used to him like you've had to get used to me. And now I'm proud to present my friend Jim Arness in Gunsmoke.
In his address to the audience, Wayne makes a point of telling us that Matt Dillon and his world of Dodge City are adult, serious, and realistic. Well, it's very funny that Wayne tells us he can verify the realism as if he were an actual gunfighting lawman a century ago. It also provides a bridge to our present day of TV in a way that few things from this era do. As we'll get into, Gunsmoke was very much a product of its time. The directing and cinematography are certain, as if they don't quite know what they're doing or what TV is quite yet. The writing can be stilted at times, and the acting is somewhat stage-like and unnatural. But it is broadly successful at gritty realism and dark drama in a way that is very recognizable to us in 2020 and beyond. Other features are apparent when you watch it. There's the somewhat terse but charming protagonist with an angry streak and a partially shrouded past in Marshal Dillon, played by James Arness. There's the beautiful ballbuster in Miss Kitty, played by Amanda Blake. She's absolutely the proprietor of a brothel, but it's never outright stated. We have the good-natured, desexualized imbecile sidekick Chester, portrayed by Dennis Weaver. These weren't exactly groundbreaking character types in Westerns, but the employment of comic relief, sexual tensions, and the shades of an anti-hero were a very big deal in TV that was marketed as adult. If prestige TV is defined by a high degree of depressing realism, outstanding individual performances, and simultaneous reliance and subversion of common genre tropes, Gunsmoke birthed all of it from its horse-riding damaged urethra. There were times when watching this where I got exactly what I expected, be it a straightforward tale of a liar who ends up robbing stagecoaches because he's horny, or a big gunfight between Marshal Dillon and some feared duelist. But there were others that completely shocked me in the nuanced tenor. Some episodes have an outright depressing feel, presaging its prestige successor that we'll discuss on our next episode concerning Deadwood. This was a very difficult show to track down. I subscribed to a network called Philo that only shows me unskippable ads for Medicare Plan D and reverse mortgages. But through that, I was able to watch a lot of episodes.
Yeah, there's like dad streaming services, and then there's dad streaming services. Don't bring me your fucking History Channel bullshit. This is for the most dads possible. The ones with the most finished basements on earth.
Yeah, this is for guys who have like dentist office in their basement. That's how finished they are. I am going to get the greatest targeted ads after subscribing to the Philo network. I mean, the good thing is all advertisers will think I'm dead in about 5 years from now,
I'll leave you
so
alone.
I won't get any anymore.
And in the meantime, your piss is just going to be so powerful. Yeah. You're gonna be loaded up on prostate. You're gonna have a fucking urethra the size of a Holland tunnel.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna fuck up the algorithm pretty bad after this. They're gonna be like, "Wow, it looks like 80-year-olds love vaping and like high-end computer periphery." Yeah, retirees love Razer gaming mouses. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna open a GameStop in the Villages based on this data.
Yeah, the second recession will be because of me. How did you find these episodes?
I was able to track them down on some dodgy like streaming sites. I didn't subscribe to anything, and I also listened to a couple of the radio plays, the William Conrad ones, which had amazingly, like I watched the episode and listened to it. It's just the same script.
Yeah,
it was they just shot the old shows on for television, which really reminds you of how in the nascent days of television, they really were just filming radio and filming plays. That was it. It like television had no it had no content of its own in terms of like aesthetic expectations or anything or content. It was all just, well, let's take the stuff that we already know what that is and just put it on this box in between a guy coming up and telling you how Chesterfields are the most smoothly packed cigarettes.
Yeah, that's like the directing and cinematography was particularly interesting to me in this regard. In the first 3 seasons, when they're still sort of in the very, very early days, because there were all these like very weird, out of place cuts and zooms.
Yeah,
that sort of decontextualize scenes for you because. Like they definitely knew what it was to film a movie at that time, but I think they thought that TV was this weird middle child between movies and radio. They weren't quite sure what it was, and they didn't. The idea of compressing a drama into like 30 or 40 minutes was unthinkable for the tools they had at the time.
Yeah. There was no dramatic format with that time length. They were essentially inventing it out of whole cloth.
I watched a lot of the early seasons, or as much as I could. There was very little of season 1 that you can find anywhere. I think you would have to marry into Les Moonves's family.
And get the old kinescopes.
Yeah, you would have to go to CVS to do this. You would have to do something there to get it.
The Museum of the Moving Image or something.
Yeah, it's very hard. I don't know who has them. I know they're out there, but not in any way I can find. And I tried I subscribed to CBS All Access too. Like I tried fucking everything, but
you were gonna get so many mail-in catheter delivery companies.
Oh my god, no, yeah. I used to get some pretty funny targeted ads because of going to New Hampshire to cover it in 2016. Like I got a lot of Trump and Kasich stuff where I think that advertisers thought I was quite old, but now it's just like out of the fucking like I'm going to get estate planning targeted ads now.
Yes, a gamer chair that also doubles as an adjustable Craftmatic bed.
yeah. An RGB lighted Craftmatic. Yeah. Like they think I'm an old bachelor who sleeps in a Murphy bed.
Yes.
But I guess Murphy beds were like the first gamer chair. Like women who wrote like women's magazines in the 40s were like, men live like this and don't see a problem, and it's just like a Murphy bed.
Yeah, that's true.
And a bindle.
Yep. Men love drinking quietly in their private eye's office and then pulling down their Murphy bed to sleep it off.
Yeah, that was the original Fall Guy thing. Now it's the dual monitor.
Yep.
But so I watched a lot of that first season, or the first few seasons. And the first episode where I watched it and I felt like I kind of knew what they were doing and I felt like they knew what they were doing. And it was still very much like an adapted radio drama, but it impressed me a lot was the episode He Who Lives by the Sword.
Yes, I watched that one as well.
Season 2. I mean, episode 34. These seasons are incredibly long.
Yeah.
But it's very early on. And I really loved this episode a lot, and I thought it's very emblematic of like the best side of Gunsmoke.
Yeah, it really reminds you that like the context for a lot of the westerns that we think of as archetypal, and specifically all of the television ones, like that is entirely a post-war phenomenon.
Yes,
and there is this sort of traumatized melancholy in them, even as it's even as they're creating this myth of American frontier virtue and everything, there is a recognition of the trauma involved in dealing out that kind of violence that clearly is part of the fact that entire greatest generation came back from World War II, and then a few of slightly younger ones came back from Korea, and we're like, wow, that was something. We'll never talk about that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I love art from this period, and I actually like pop art kind of from this period because it's sort of more reflective than stuff from the 80s is.
Right.
Like stuff from the 80s would be as popular as Gunsmoke it's insane because it's made by the children of these boomers who just sort of like obscure. I mean, this sort of lens you can look at it through is the boomers and then the Xers is Eisenhower making the military-industrial complex speech after doing nothing to stop it as president.
Right, of course. You guys might want. Hey, I'm out, but you guys might want to check out this stuff. I think I might have left the iron on. You might want to check out.
And then everyone after going like, oh, that was weird. Let's double that. So yeah, you had the greatest generation, the silent generation, who were just fucking horribly traumatized. Like, just one of the most brutal 30-year stretches in human history. And Korea wasn't exactly an easy war for us.
No.
It was fucking brutal war. But yeah, it's beyond just like how we look at it now when we're like, oh, it's not gay to talk about stuff. It's like, that wasn't even in the question. Like,
No, yeah.
You just didn't do it. It's not that it was looked down on or anything. It was that you did. It's just like the idea of a man doing it was insane.
Yeah.
It was insane. No one did it. Women didn't do it. Like, my grandmother is 100 years old. She lived through the Great Depression. She like lived through all this insane stuff. And it just like, she herself has experienced, immense personal tragedies in her life. And when you ask her about stuff, she goes, you just got to keep going. Like, that's what they're all like.
Yep.
That's what they're all like. Like, I have very old relatives, and it's just not thought of as something you do. And so after, like, the art that the Xers and the Boomers made is so interesting because it looked at their parents who were horribly fucked up. Not just from World War II, but from everything that had happened.
Yeah.
Like seeing their parents sell one of their brothers and sisters to a fucking carnival during the Great Depression. Yeah. And we're like, oh, well, they don't talk about things. War must be awesome.
Yeah.
Because their lives were good after it. And that's why you have the stuff you have from the 80s. But these people couldn't talk about it. But there was like this like little peeking of light through the veil, where they're indicating to you everything feels very bad, but they can't escape. There's no salvation. There's no closure. That's out. Yeah. You just live with your wounds forever. And that's what I thought this episode was about. That's what I thought He Who Lives by the Sword is about. It's very determinist. Yeah.
Like no one is free to choose their place in life, which flows from the greater cultural taboo on discussing, traumas and experiences, because what would be the point of it?
Yes.
It is only wallowing. It is only undermining yourself, which is kind of given that cultural context, like it's probably better advice, but the cost of that is that you are haunted by the knowledge that you have not really ever done anything of your own volition, really. Even though it has left you feeling like guilt that you can't even fully own.
Yeah, this episode reminded me of like a field in England.
Yeah.
So I should explain what this episode is about. Unless our listeners also want to get ads for catheters. But it's so there's a guy named Joe Velk, which is just a great dirtbag name.
Absolutely.
By the way, I loved it.
That is a Facebook guy for sure.
Yeah,
Joe Delk stole my headphones.
Joe Delk, yeah. He comes to town. He comes to Dodge City, and we see these two sort of like boyish young men in the saloon, and they're flirting with Miss Kitty, the sort of milfy proprietor of the inn. And she's like, oh, you boys are cute, but I'm an old hag. I'm 28 years old.
I'm done for.
And he cuts in. Joe Delk cuts in, and he's this like grizzled older guy, very serious affect. He absolutely picks a fight with them. He escalates it for no reason, and he sort of eggs on the first younger brother into pulling his gun. Obviously just blows his brains out, just shoots him dead right there. The other brother sees his brother get shot to death, runs at Joe Delk. Joe Delk shoots him. Marshal Matt Dillon comes in, beats the living shit out of him, beats the shit out of Joe Delk. And the entire episode is about, after Dillon lets Delk out of prison, it's about how he's ruined Delk, about how the beating has traumatized Delk so bad that he can't pick fights anymore. He can't escalate things. He definitely can't pull his gun. he gave him PTSD by beating the fucking shit out of him.
Yeah.
And he's just alphaing Delk this entire episode. Like, it's incredible. Like, you keep expecting this big confrontation, but it just repeated sad vignettes about what a cuck Delk is now. Like, Delk gets challenged by some loser, by some bum in the bar who's trying to escalate things like Delk was earlier. And Delk completely avoids it. The guy who is fucking with him hears that this is Joe Delk, and immediately he's conciliatory. He's like, oh my God, I didn't mean to offend you. But he doesn't realize how ruined Delk is, how fucked up he is. Dillon gives him an ultimatum to leave town. And Delk basically says to him, I can't do my thing anymore. Like, I can't do my thing of just killing people for no reason.
Yeah.
That is technically legal because it's self-defense by Old West doctrine, but
I can't do the self-care of goading cowpokes into drawing on me so that I can kill them.
There's this thing where like people around Dillon think that Delk's gonna fool him. He's gonna try to get one over on him because he got his ass kicked. But no, it never happens. It's just sad Delk shit. And eventually, like, he gets Delk to leave town. But before he goes, Delk goes, you know, like, we're the same thing. Like, you're also just a fucking completely traumatized, scarred, fucked up killer. But you have a badge. And Dillon does the most, like, oh, at least I raise my kids thing. Like, he goes, like, well, I have a conscience.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you don't. But this was years ahead of its time, I thought. I love this episode. There are some great Westerns that hold up now, like High Noon, obviously, everyone knows. And I feel like Westerns were a great vehicle for people to get ideas out there that weren't necessarily, you couldn't do in like any other genre of movie. But I thought this was particularly weighty for its time and for its format, for the very new TV. It's like now if there was, you know, the best show since The Sopranos was on Quibi.
God, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It also, and this is true of early television. Like, obviously, it was not serialized. Like, they were always self-contained stories.
Yeah.
And what that ended up meaning is that, especially in the early days, is that the character was sort of background because the characters didn't really change. So what every episode would just be sort of a little morality play.
Yes.
And so you would get, instead of like getting, you know, these overarching themes over the course of an episode and these overarching narratives and character development, you would just have this sort of this kind of grim space where these characters were sort of doomed to relive the same experiences over and over again, and have the same like messages like revealed by their actions, but then have it not be able to build to anything. Like, which speaks to the sense of them being unable to break out of like the perception of themselves and their position in the social order.
Yeah, and there's not even a thing that's like, oh, well, you know, Dillon's very fucked up and he'll never be okay. He's never going to settle down and marry. You know, he never marries Kitty, ever. Him and Amanda Blake never get together. There's no closure. I mean, it's actually very appropriate. This show ended very anticlimactically. There was no big finale or anything. It was just abruptly canceled in 1971. Like, they were just done with it. And in a way that shocked all the stars. But Dillon never really, like, quite saves the day. It's always after something awful happens.
Yeah.
The repeated thing. Like, in the Delk episode, Delk just kills like two innocent 17-year-olds.
Yeah, the first characters you meet are these fresh-faced kids. It's the protagonist from that Johnny Cash song, "Don't Take Your Guns to Town."
Yes,
and just immediately murked, and all Dillon could do is just beat up the guy after it happened.
Yeah, and ruin his life and just send him to another town to probably get murdered.
Yeah, like somebody else's problem.
This is like a repeat, like the episode, the killer, like all these things. It's always something awful happened in or around Dodge City, and Dillon's like, "Oh yeah, no, I can. I mean, I can make the situation kind of worse." It's very much like Justified in that I feel like I wouldn't with Justified, the show Justified. It's definitely a joke. that Raylan Gibbons is terrible at his job. That's like a little wink at the audience. But with here, I wouldn't really. This show doesn't really have the sense of humor that show did, and that's just a function of how new it was and what TV and film were at the time.
Irony hadn't been invented yet for television.
I mean, what caused irony? Is it just a good side effect of decadence? I don't know. What would you even call like the first ironic movie or show?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk like classical irony, of course, Twilight Zone, where like they would literally have ironic endings. But that even there, like it would all be very serious. Like the irony was in the service of Rod Serling's moralism.
Yeah.
So even then, we didn't really have it. Yeah, you need decadence. You need people to have not attained their lives through their own efforts, I guess you'd call it.
I think maybe it wasn't until the 60s that we started recognizing irony in mass American media. And then the 70s, it became more popular.
Yeah.
It can't have. I mean, I wish they made this show. Actually, no, I don't wish they made the show today. It would be so fucking bad.
Oh God, awful.
If they made it like, oh man.
God.
Like, think about the morality tales they would do today with the show. God,
Jesus.
It would be like Marshal Dillon registering people to vote. God, that would suck.
It would be about how he needs to stop shooting everyone and start honoring lived experiences.
Oh my God, Marshal Dillon goes to therapy.
Oh,
the show's
boy.
just over.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, what I mean is, I wish they could make it with the irony we have access to today, because I think it would retain a lot of the weightiness and very good depressing affect that a lot of the best episodes have, while also having this sense of humor that makes the whole thing easier to swallow.
Yeah.
And, you know, the way that Sopranos or Deadwood or these other shows that we're going to get to later in the series do. But I don't think we can talk about this show without talking about Leo Strauss.
Of course.
No, as every show. But this is the show that Leo Strauss loved. This is when Leo Strauss would get home from, you know, talking to the children of some of the worst people in America in Hyde Park, University of Chicago. He would never miss an episode of Gunsmoke, ever. And it's so interesting to me because, you know, in the Leo Strauss myth, we should explain for the audience who Leo Strauss is. Leo Strauss was he was an academic at U Chicago, and he is actually, there's a whole Adam Curtis thing about this, about how he's actually very similar to Sayyid Qutb, the foundational modern Islamist theorist, in that they both think that liberal democracy is self-defeating.
Yes.
And Qutb's prescription for that is, you know, of course, political Salafism and jihad. But Strauss, how people interpreted him, the neocons that were born out of Straussianism, they believed that there also needed to be jihad, a struggle. And that struggle would be conducted by endless warfare by the Western empires. Because if there's no struggle, if there's no existential, never-ending fight against good or evil, you do get the decadence of liberal democracy, where it becomes too soft, and then it will fall like all empires.
Yeah, every generation has to like earn their place by fighting for it.
Yeah. Strauss did have some like interesting interpretations of Heidegger and shit, but this is a podcast about shows. We're not getting into that shit. But it is interesting to me how much he liked the show, because it seems to like it seems a lot of the show, I don't think he interpreted it right, because as we're reading it, Gunsmoke is a show about how like people can be stuck in these roles in their life, like he said, and there's no way they can get out of their station. If they think about their station, if something happens that rattles them from that station, like happened to Joe Delk, they're done. They're like a shark who stops moving. They're fucking dead. And that there's no actual honor in a lot of this. Like, yeah, you think, you know, Marshal Dillon is kind of cool, but really his life's terrible.
Yeah, it sucks. He doesn't have like the whole post-war promise right, was that you went to war, you fought, you saw horrible things, but then you got home and you were rewarded for it if you were part of like the white, greatest generation, the citizen soldiers. He never gets that on the course of the show. He just has to keep killing people all the time, even though he himself says that he's not doing it out of a desire. He's doing it out of a sense of duty.
Yeah. And I mean, there were, I think this is particularly interesting when you reflect on the bounty of the 50s and 60s, the bounty for Americans. Dillon lives a very austere life. Every time he's like at dinner with Miss Kitty or something, it was just references to like how shitty the food is, how awful his living quarters is, the absolute shit money he makes. Like, there are a lot of scenes where Dillon, like in one of these episodes, Dillon has an idea for cattle ranching that would make it more efficient and it would increase your profit margins a lot. And Kitty goes, "Well, you should do that." And he's like, "I already have a job." And she's basically like, "Your life sucks, Matt. Your life's terrible." And he's like, whatever. But yeah, he gets none of the bounty. And there's also, there's the evil never ends, but no one's made better for their struggle against it.
Yeah. It doesn't lead to catharsis, which is, and honestly, I feel like that's a way that those old shows are more broadly realistic than the modern prestige shows, because the modern prestige conception is that you're going to see these characters evolve over time towards something. Not always, you've got like the show like you got a show like The Sopranos where stasis is the point, like the inability of people to move forward. But largely like the serialized aspect of it sort of forces that novelistic move towards character self-reflection and revelation. And that, of course, is not really the way most people live. It's certainly not the way that we are allowed to live in this country. And shows like Gunsmoke kind of get at that truth more than our modern shows do.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I particularly am interested in TV from the 50s to the 70s because, the more I watch of it, the more, I wouldn't even say ahead of its time is the way to put it. I would say it's more correct in some ways than the TV now. Like, I mean, your typical Netflix streaming show that's geared towards young people is, and by young people, I mean anyone from like 18 to 30 in the entertainment sense. It's more like what you think a show from the 50s would be like if you weren't familiar.
Yeah.
Everyone's interpretation of media from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and it's true in a lot of cases, but not every case, is what we've found out, is that it's a straightforward morality tale. It's open and shut. Every protagonist who has a problem, they overcome it through personal strength and also virtue and the fact that, they're the protagonist. Everyone loves them. Everyone's going to help them get through their problems. They grow as people in these incredible ways, just seemingly every episode. It's now, all these things are about these, characters who, perhaps they have supernatural powers or they're in the midst of some existential life, good versus evil mission. They're in the course of saving the world, but they also overcome, the death of their parents or like pushing away love or some bullshit like that. By the end of their story, they haven't just saved the world and become the most powerful being, but they've completed the objective of what would be 12 years of therapy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They're finally ready to forgive their parents or something.
Yeah, and it is. You see the way that people react to shows now. Like every time Netflix makes some awful fucking tweet, that's like, on period, we stand the OA. every time, go under there. Or, just search for what shows people are talking about. There's so much fucking content now that there are 30 shows like that. And you can pick one for whatever you feel like best, speaks to you the most. If you feel like you're a gifted kid who maybe hit a skid in life, there's a show for you. If you feel like you need something to speak to your particular identity that exists for you, if you need something that that is more family oriented, whatever. There's just so fucking much of it.
Yeah.
That you can get that same story, the same shitty hero's journey that's open shut, but also has this new modern feature of everyone overcoming trauma. And it's, there aren't a lot of uncomfortable questions you're left with a lot of the time.
No, in fact, you're not supposed to be left with any questions. You're supposed to be left affirmed. You go to Netflix, and it because television now it's not what it was then, which was entertainment, a thing to do at the end of the day, as so much as now it's a constitutive element of people's sense of identity. And so their shows have to affirm them in like a significant way, because we're asking more of our television than we ever used to, just like we're asking more of politics than we ever used to in terms of providing us with like a significant part of our self-perception. And that means that our shows kind of can't leave us asking questions unless that's the point, and that's what we're getting out of them, is that we feel sophisticated for watching them. But for the most part, yeah, we're basically going towards every show just being the remember to drink water hour.
Yeah. And this, there was always affirmation in entertainment, and it comes in, more varied forms than we think about. I mean, Bonanza is kind of a form of affirmation, but it was the kind of like identity-based affirmations that you would get at the time, which is like, hey, if you're a shit kicker hillbilly, like here's your shit,
Yeah.
It's the hillbilly fucking funny story hour. But now it's so varied, and there's so much content and everything, and it's so cheap to distribute now that you can do it. Like whatever your microgroup is, like there's probably something for me. Are you a secular Jewish fucking? Did you read Master of the Senate when you were 14? You have a pancreatic condition. The Netflix character that's exactly like you. But I think that if Strauss lived today, I mean, he would first of all have the shittiest account on Twitter.
Oh my God, awful.
Terrible. He would have block lists. But I think he would find more that he would like in shows today than even Gunsmoke. I mean, who knows? Because he even misinterpreted Gunsmoke. But I don't know. Like, I am curious about this. And this was, I don't think there's probably any way to find this, because it's not like I can go to a forum from the 50s or 60s or 70s. But do you think what happens with The Sopranos, what happens with Justify, like any show that's about like either stasis, like you said with The Sopranos, or just like the flaws, and not just flaws, but lack of closure.
Yeah.
And horrible, like just the horrible state of someone's life, even though they're your protagonist. People very rarely get that. Like audiences very rarely pick that up, or at least the most vocal audiences. Like people are still getting Walter White tattoos.
Absolutely.
I wonder if that was a widespread thing with Gunsmoke. I mean, people fucking loved it. They loved it to the point that it's one of the longest running shows ever. From 1955 to 1971. Like, incredible.
The entirety of like the post-war American apogee. The high point of America's global hegemony and domestic prosperity.
We went from being the Gambinos in the 40s with the Dulles brothers as Carlo and Lucky Luciano to Malaise time.
Yeah. No, we're all, like you said. Yeah, we're the Philly mob now. Nicky Scarfo and company.
Yeah. How can you run the city? You can't find the fucking city. I think people must have thought that Dillon was a cool guy.
Oh, absolutely. No, yeah. Like that's I mean, just like Tony Soprano, a lot of people think was a cool guy. And the thing is that, like, I think the reason Strauss did like the show is that even if it is layered with this melancholy and this sense of trauma that can't be acknowledged, and the sense of duty as curse as much as it is, a virtue, it also by repeatedly told people, like, yes, this sucks. It's hard to be the sheriff, but someone's got to do it. And you'd rather it be Matt Dillon than someone with lower character. And that is the role of America. and that is also a thing that is there if you want it to be there. And that's the thing about all these shows is that, the authorial intent is one thing. The cultural context is going to determine what people take from it.
Yeah, I guess it would be impossible at this time for people to interpret it this way, right?
Yeah.
Like, interpret it in the way as it seems clearly intended
Right, because we're looking at it through after having that, we're looking at that at the other side of the bell curve, at the other side of the rainbow, whereas at the time people were thought that they were forging a sort of an eternal American utopia, and so therefore the trauma and the horror in the eyes of Dillon and these characters, as much as we as much as it's real and as much as it comes out, I think honestly without anyone even knowing it, just by virtue of being made by and for people who'd experienced it, that felt probably like a price worth paying at the time. And only now can we look back and say, oh, they were not headed where they thought they were.
Yeah, it really makes me wonder what they knew.
Yeah.
The people writing this show. I mean, yeah, they knew something.
Yeah,
they knew something that everyone else didn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the role of the artist, right, in society.
Yeah.
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 To see just beyond the bend of the river.
It's so funny because, did you watch any, episodes that are supposed to be funny episodes of this?
I didn't see the funny one. Well, I'm assuming, Cooter, falling into a wash tub or something.
Yeah, it's shit like that.
Yeah. Like the scene in Hail Caesar from Good Old Moon where guy's trying to fight his reflection and shit. Trying to grab a pie off a windowsill.
Yeah, exactly. I watched an episode where, there's an old drunk who's... he's drunk because he has a floppy hat. I guess that's look how much things have changed. Now it would be the flattest of brims, but back then it was you had a floppy hat.
The flop, yeah, because you needed the brim to hide your eyes, to protect your eyes from the hot sun while you're rustling the cattle or facing down with outlaws. You can't have the sun in your eyes. A floppy hat in the West is essentially like a limp dick.
Yeah, it's very You definitely have whiskey dick if your hat's like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the funny stuff is this old disgusting drunk who's let me get a piece of that to Miss Kitty, and she's she runs away, but she falls into a horse trough. There's a very weird episode I watched it's not supposed to be funny, but one of the girls who works for Miss Kitty, her son comes to town. There was some custody thing, some Facebook custody thing, and the kid's living with his grandparents, but she brings the kid around so the kid can learn how to shoot and learn what cows are because he's too cityfied.
Right.
And it's you never see her or the kid fucking ever again. It's very weird.
They got eaten by coyotes. R.I.P.
Yeah. I mean, in the real West, I guess everyone involved in that story likely dies. But those are all, they're very weird because it's the funny episodes and I guess the heartwarming episodes, the ones that aren't super Dillon heavy, they're a reminder of the cultural context that this existed in. I mean, yeah, not just TV. We've talked about how they were figuring it out at the time of making this, but I mean, there were a lot of movies that you watch from this time where you watch it and go, why was this made? Not that it's particularly bad, but it's what point were you getting?
Yeah.
It's there's a sweet boy who picks flowers for his mother, but he has to work in an ice cream shop. That's this would be a movie you could see at that time. I also watched some episodes from the final season or the final seasons. Did you get to see any of those?
I couldn't find any of the newer ones, which is annoying because I'm very interested in what that would have been like, because of how things had already changed by the time they were making it, how transformative the 60s had been to the culture. And I was wondering how that was reflected in the program.
So I got to watch a couple episodes. There was a really weird two-parter I watched, and I guess it's also very emblematic of the time because if I associate one thing with TV and film in the 70s, it's people being incredibly ambitious but not quite having the technology or the precedent or know-how of making something as big as they wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. Being like 20 years, 10, 20, 30 years behind the curve as far as technology. And also, yeah, like if the only movies ever made, if like the biggest movie ever made was like, I don't know, what would it be? Like Citizen Kane or like, Citizen Kane's too early, but like Spartacus or something. Mm-hmm. It's like you wouldn't, if you wanted to make like a TV epic, you wouldn't know how to do it, and it would look and run kind of shitty. And that's what this one did. It was, I watched this incredibly fucking bloated episode, this 2-parter, 2 hours of TV. And it was very sort of Walking Dead-esque, not the zombies, but like a bunch of assholes that you don't really see, you haven't really seen before, trying to run a sort of military encampment. They make it very dark, like way darker than even earlier Gunsmoke or even the radio show, which was, as we said, way darker. But like, yeah, some greasy guy tries to steal from some guy who has that famous horseshoe balding pattern that was so popular in the 70s. There's like, they stab him to death. They hang the like military governor of the camp like hangs all these guys. Like, it's a very brutal thing. It's incredibly brutal, but it also has that very 70s thing of having, like 20 different fucking characters who all kind of look the same because it was all the same, like Wonder Bread and ham fed white guys. Where I watched it multiple times and like tried to look for summaries and shit. I couldn't figure out what the fuck was happening.
Yeah.
And it made me think of like stuff like, Caligula, things from that era where it's like, yeah, I guess if you could have done this even in like 1989, it would have made sense, but it's so hard to do with the tools you had then.
Yeah. Yeah, because by then, because of the 60s, because of like the tectonic shifts in culture, you had this expanded, as you say, ambition, but as yet the economy hadn't like caught up to it yet. And with television, what ended up like filling that role just around that time was the mini series.
Yes.
But those were all like a few like Roots and stuff. That was a couple of years after Gunsmoke left. Like the mini series were sort of they were like a transitional fossil between the old the old standalone shows like Gunsmoke and like newer more character driven and more narratively complex prestige shows were those like event shows, like Winds of War and fucking Roots and shit like that. So Gunsmoke is sort of just at the tail end of this form of storytelling where they didn't have the wherewithal to give it the full funding and budget it would need to like do the thing that it's trying to do artistically.
Yeah, so for our, the show we normally do, we watched The Comey Rule, which was a Showtime miniseries about James Comey and the email investigation to Hillary and then the Russia probe. And during the entire time I thought about it, I was like, this is like something that somebody would watch in like the early 80s. Like, it seems very antiquated to have a miniseries now because, I mean, now I'm pretty sure the algorithm tells people this. It's like, well, you can have a show that's designed to only run for 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's better to do that because the more that you stretch something out and bloat something without the goal of making it like a 12-year engagement is you have more eyes on it. You can, sell that to investors better. It's the same reason why every album now made by a big artist is made for Spotify. It has way more tracks than it should. Everything's a little bit longer than it should be. Everything's at this perfect like 4-minute mark to maximize the amount of money that they get from streaming services.
Yeah, I was stunned when I saw that the Comey Rule was 2 nights. I was like, when was the last time that was a thing?
Yeah, I like growing up like in the late 90s, early 2000s, I caught like the tail end of miniseries. Like Yeah, it was just like being phased out. It was like watching The Last Dinosaurs I remember watching a bunch of really weird. There was like a Merlin miniseries.
I remember that. That was like a huge deal, a big budget. I'm sure if we watched it now, just absolute dog shit CGI. But yes, I remember that.
Yeah, I don't know why I remember this. I remember the end of the Merlin thing. I watched it with my mom. He's reunited with his lost love, and he uses his last bit of magic to make them both like 28 again.
Oh, adorable.
Yeah, very weird. But yeah, they just, even after 9/11, there are some 9/11 related miniseries, but they weren't like events. Really, like I don't remember people talking about them. Yeah, that is something I strongly associate with that time. And there were Gunsmoke like made for TV movies.
Yeah, they did those in the 90s too. They brought James Arness's old ass back after he quit as a marshal and actually did have a ranch. But then, of course, he gets drawn back in, as he always must.
I love that when cowboy actors retire to a ranch. Is that just like, I guess actors oftentimes like they just have to believe that they're the guy. Yeah. But it's also like, old ass James Arness, he played that character for so fucking long.
Yeah.
And just living the lifestyle you would as a 50s and 60s actor, the amount of barbiturates he would take. Probably towards the end of his life, he thought he was.
I mean, you gotta believe, right? That at the end, he thought that he was Matt Dillon. Because he'd spent more time doing that than any other thing in his life.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, it's like how I think that Reagan defaulted to movies when he was office. Yeah. In the end, though, I was like very pleasantly surprised by what I saw.
Yeah, it reminds you that as easy it is sort of to roll your eyes at pre-ironic entertainment, especially before they really invented comedy, in my opinion. But the people who made those shows, like they mostly came from like theater. They came from theater and radio backgrounds that involved. Like they knew fucking story. They knew how to tell a goddamn story. Like they were craftspeople first and foremost. And if you have craft, you're like way more than halfway there with any project. And that's the thing that those early shows had in spades. And also the fact that they were essentially inventing genres on the fly gives them a very just a creative frisson that's interesting and is sort of the opposite of what we have now, where everything is just desperately tacking towards an algorithm.
Yes. And characters are just made for, hoping that like one demographic will strongly latch onto it. Like there will be a character for young men. There'll be a character for, professional women. And I thought the characterization in Gunsmoke was good with at least two of the main characters. The other ones, they're kind of stock characters. But exactly. It's the story in the first half of the series, I would say, that's very good in every episode. I mean, I do think it's interesting towards the end that the stories become bloated and sort of hard to follow, because I think that's a case of probably the theater people getting phased out and being replaced with television writers.
Yeah, well, because now that's a thing.
Yeah,
that's a job with expectations and elements that have become sort of reinforcing and are no longer organically being created, are just being reproduced.
Yeah, I would guess like what the show in the end reminded me of, like not obviously in tone or theme or content, but sort of how I responded to it. My Girl Friday.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, I agree with you that I don't really think comedy as is recognizable was truly invented until Red Fox.
Yeah. Until someone says the word pussy, you don't really have comedy.
Yeah, like Red Fox. I mean, I have always argued that Jewish and black comedians invented the irony that we recognize today.
Yeah, no, totally true.
Wasps can't do that.
They cannot. No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's too. Yeah, it's just not in their emotional purview. But My Girl Friday, I expected a slog, like I initially expected with Gunsmoke. I watched it last year, and I actually loved it.
No, that's a good movie. At the front page too, which is like what it was based on, also very good. Ben Hesh and Carly McCarthy, baby.
Yeah, and it reminded me of that in that it's not a comedy in a lot of ways that are recognizable today, but there are parts of it that are actually like, just in the way that this gets to the prestige sense of emptiness and lack of catharsis or closure. My Girl Friday sort of got the sense of a proto-irony, I would say.
Yeah.
Gave a stock, like a suit base, to things like Brass Eye and Blackadder.
Yeah.
Where it's a comedy about sort of pomposity and micro-hysterias. Yeah, it's like, I wouldn't exactly, just as far as my own personal enjoyment, My Girl Friday, I wouldn't say, like, I had a better time watching that than, say, like, Borat.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, I think Borat's funnier because it's more recognizable to me.
Right. There's a dick. There's a guy's dick.
Right. There's a dick. They throw the Jew down the well. All that shit. It's awesome. But, I mean, also comedy ages the worst. But just like Gunsmoke, like, I would obviously prefer to watch Deadwood because it makes more sense. For me, it has the advantage of decades and decades of development and technology and everything. But there is enough in common, and the idea of seeing where this all started was, I actually really enjoyed it, and it was, there are some things that kind of are better in a few ways. That's how I'd equate it. Like,
I definitely of those things, I really miss. And the thing is, I was around to see the end of those, and and of course they're still around on, like procedurals on networks, but
yeah.
But like just a self-contained narrative can be so good, and it's to me it's sort of sad that now the only self-contained narratives are shows that are just plot.
Yeah,
like the cop shows and the procedural shows, because like Gunsmoke, is story driven, but like I said, there are these morals, there are these sort of not even character based, but like more broadly speaking, like insights, I guess you would say, or lessons that go throughout this like 30-minute narrative, and I think that like telling a compact story that actually has a moral, I would prefer that to the current mode of just trying to create this really pandering sense of character identification between the protagonist of the show and the person watching it, and just having that stand in for anything like you're watching the show because this character is like you know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say, if I would say, like, the closest analog between Gunsmoke and a show that's currently running, I mean, if Justified was still on, I would probably say Justified. But for a show that's still running, and actually it might be more similar, Law and Order. In terms of what it is, where it's like... No,
Law and Order is absolutely the Gunsmoke of like the last 30 years. Like, not only because of how absurdly long running it was, but because it was self-contained, and it was story first, but it wasn't just story.
But, I mean, if we're going to put them side by side, Gunsmoke, to me, not as far as watchability. Like, let's be honest, Law and Order it's the state of the art of TV production.
Yeah.
It's so easy to watch. It's like, it's just like, it's like getting a shot in the arm from an experienced nurse.
Yeah, right.
You don't even feel it.
Find a vein immediately, yeah.
Yeah, you can have it on in the background when you're doing fucking anything and pick up what's happening.
Yeah.
It's just as far as efficiency and getting what all the characters are about in the story, like, it's perfectly done. But in a few areas, I would put Gunsmoke far ahead of it. And those areas are characterization in a lot of parts. Like, I think that Matt Dillon is a more interesting character than any Law and Order protagonist.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, people obviously love in SVU, and Americans love SVU the most because it's about sex crimes and people are fucking obsessed with that.
Yes.
But it's because, like, Christopher Maloney and Mariska Hargitay are, like, really sexy.
Yeah.
They're both, like, incredibly sexy, attractive people.
Yeah.
That's really it. Like, I do know a bit about their characters, but I can't tell you. I've seen a bunch of Law and Order SVU. More than I've seen Gunsmoke, but I could tell you way less about, like, Olivia Benson than I could Matt Dillon.
Yeah.
And also, I don't love making this evaluation, but Gunsmoke's kind of better politically in a lot of ways than Law and Order. Law and Order is cop propaganda.
Oh, 100%.
How do you think you get Americans to sign on to the idea of, fucking cops having F-16s?
Yeah.
But to tell them they're sickos and murderers and child abductions that happen right under their nose everywhere. The guy you'd last suspect.
Yeah.
Most charming guy in your building. Guess what? He's killed 78 children.
Yeah.
It's and like I don't think that's the reason that we have just out of control, awful policing, but it's definitely helped sell the idea to a lot of people. And Gunsmoke, to its credit, it's not saying you need this guy around because there's so many sickos. It's just like these people are slotted into their terrible stations in life and will never be happy.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone has their duty, and they have to carry it out.
Well, our duty is to watch 19 more shows that we think are emblematic of their eras of TV and American culture and politics. I think we've covered Gunsmoke. I think we've gotten everything with this.
Yeah.
If you are the foremost Gunsmoke scholar among our listeners and we got something wrong, fuck off. I did my best.
Yeah. And also, congratulations on the virginity. I mean, honestly.
Yeah. No, like you
should not have been doing that. You should not have been watching Gunsmoke.
Yeah. I'm doing it for a job and I don't even feel like I should have really been doing it. I mean, you could have learned a language in that time.
Yeah. You could have learned how to do a kickflip.
Yeah, there's so much you could have done and you chose to become like a 25-year-old expert in Gunsmoke. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, and look at your own life before you criticize our take on the show.
But if you are the 25-year-old expert in Gunsmoke, or literally anyone else, please join us again soon, where we will look at Deadwood.
Yes, the modern take on the Western, the prestige take on the Western.
But we'll be back then. Matt, thank you as always.
Of course. Saddle up and ride, partner.
Yeah. Taking the night train to Mundo Fine.